Against, kindly say no. The ayes. Are you saying no? All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Government business, bills for second reading.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Customs and Excise Duties Act, Chapter 48 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to vary the rate of duty on soups and broths in solid or powder form, including ramen noodles and other related items in the custom tariff and trade classification, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, the purpose behind this bill is to support the local production of ramen. There is, as I understand it, a Belizean entity producing these noodles, and therefore the intention is to vary the duty on imported ramen and to set a rate that makes it competitive for the local supplier or the local producer, who, in order to create jobs and to stimulate economic activity in Belize.
I recognize Senator Patrick Farber.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to contribute to the debate on this Customs and Excise Duties Amendment Number 2 bill, Madam President, and I hasten to say that I do so on behalf of the Belizean people, families who continue to struggle with rising food prices, shrinking purchasing power, and uncertainty about the real direction of our trade policy. The bill, Madam President, is presented as a technical adjustment, one to comply with our international trade agreements. Senator Courtney also mentioned just now that it is to support a local producer. But, Madam President, what we are couching as technical has real consequences for the Belizean people. And when they go to the supermarket, there will be real consequences. When duty structures, Madam President, shift even slightly, the impact is felt immediately for the ordinary Belizeans. The example that has been raised not only in the lower house, Madam President, but also in the streets is the case of instant noodles, or as Belizeans know them, ramen noodles. These products are not luxury items, they are survival food for many households. Students rely on them, Madam President, working parents rely on them, single income families rely on them. And any adjustment in tariff classification or replacement duty structures that increases the cost of these items directly affects the most vulnerable citizens of this country. I don't think, Madam President, that it is something that we should be terribly proud about, but many families, and I don't think anymore that it's an economic issue. I think there are many families who genuinely love ramen noodles and they eat it, you know. But there are still many families who depend on it because they can't afford anything else. And whereas before you could get 4 or 5 ramen noodles for $1, I understand. The price has already gone up before we are doing this kind of adjustment. 4 for $1, no? How much you would say? $12 a case. And I'm sure that you can afford better than ramen noodles, Senator, so so we'll take your word for what it is. But it was affordable, and we have seen increases in the price even before this proposed measure, Madam President. The government says that these changes are required under international agreements, and that may be so, but compliance with treaties must never replace the responsibility to protect the Belizean consumer. Agreements are tools for development. They must not become instruments for hardship. Madam President, this bill raises several concerns that deserve careful attention. First, we believe that this bill reduces transparency in how tariff charges translate into retail prices. Belizeans are told duties are reduced, yet at the checkout counter, prices continue to rise. The public deserves a clear explanation, Madam President, of how these adjustments affect the final cost of basic goods. Secondly, the bill exposes Belize's food security issue to increase dependence on imported products without parallel strategy to strengthen the domestic production. If tariffs fall on imported food, while local producers receive no structured support, then we weaken our agricultural resilience. Now, I know what Senator Courtney will say, that we are here doing this for our local producer, but across the board, it doesn't work for our local producers. Thirdly, Madam President, there is no accompanying social protection measure linked to these adjustments. If government policy changes affect staple food prices, then government policy must also cushion vulnerable households from the impact. And lastly, Madam President, the bill reflects a broader pattern. Trade liberalization continues without a national competitiveness strategy. Belize cannot simply open its markets and hope for growth. We must prepare our producers, strengthen logistics, reduce electricity costs, and expand export capacity before liberalization produces real benefits. In effect, Madam President, what the government is trying to do is protectionism. And in the global world, that is not how it works. We should be working to encourage this producer of noodles to get down his costs, or get down their costs, so that they can be competitive against the countries that we import from. That is really what we ought to be doing. Madam President, we need to comply with these treaties, but blind compliance is dangerous. Parliament must examine not only what agreements require, but also how implementation affects Belizean families. We therefore call, Madam President, as the opposition, for three clear commitments from the government. Firstly, that they provide a public schedule showing which staple goods are affected by these tariff adjustments. And secondly, that we publish an impact assessment on consumer food prices. And thirdly, that we introduce targeted protection measures for low-income households if basic food imports become more expensive. Belizeans, Madam President, deserve policy that balances international obligations with national priorities. They deserve clarity, they deserve protection, and they deserve a government that places their cost of living at the center of every economic decision. Before I sit down, Madam President, let me say that I saw that they are increasing the tariffs on the imports from other countries in order to protect this producer. And I wonder, again, what is our policy? What is the government's wider policy? One of the countries that we have slapped on the 20% for is Taiwan. And we have gone through great pains to sit and to negotiate a good trading relationship with Taiwan. And now, I suspect it is not much that we can do for them in terms of this relationship. We have a lot to import from them. They're not our major trading partner, we understand, but where we can import from them, that should not be hindered by the policies of the government. And clearly, this bill attempts to do that. And so, given the recommendations that we've made, Madam President, we ask the government to make the changes following our recommendations, and we can then consider supporting this bill in that new form. I thank you.
I recognize Senator Christopher Cowie.
Madam President, just a few comments in terms of the objective and to bring some clarity. I don't totally disagree with Senator Farber on the matter of protectionism, but this is not protectionism. This is what we would refer to as strategic trade policy. You see in the global community a recognition of the importance of food security for one, but also of having and developing your local manufacturing, a local manufacturing sector. That is a severe weakness that Belize suffers from for various reasons. But it's unfortunate that one of the reasons why we suffer from minimal manufacturing locally is because of our own tax structures. Our own tax structures, in effect, have a reverse discrimination on local manufacturing, even to the extent that we have trade within CARICOM. You might appreciate that CARICOM imports, including under this very same bill, exempts CARICOM imports completely, 0%. Yet, those imports from CARICOM attract, and more so than that, do not even attract environmental tax. Yet, when it comes to local manufactured products, the inputs on those locally manufactured products attract environmental tax, a clear instance of reverse discrimination. And it goes broader than that. Even in the case of many items that are zero rated, ramen noodles is one of those. And it remains so, GST free, zero rated. But products that are produced in Belize, as opposed to those products that are imported that are zero rated, are not zero rated. They are standard rated at 12.5%. So a continuing scenario of reverse discrimination. Now, of course, there are political considerations as arises with respect to tax, but the fact of the matter is local manufacturing is put at an immediate disadvantage by these examples of reverse discrimination. So when you look at ramen noodles and the intended manufacturing and production of ramen noodles, the importation of the inputs in relation to the production of these items are not at 0%. You have sunflower seeds, canola seeds, sunflower oil, palm oil. A lot of these things do attract some level of duty. So that means that in manufacturing of the same instant noodles or ramen noodles, you have an application of duty that puts the local manufacturer at a competitive disadvantage. In time, I think what will be needed is a more comprehensive approach and a shift away from import duty into excise duty. But we're a ways away from that. So when we look at this, we have to find a mechanism that can work in the interim and to enable the development of local manufacturing. This manufacturing operation that we're looking at is an investment of around $25 million, capital investment of around $25 million. In 5 years, it will generate employment of around or over 100 persons. It will mean foreign exchange savings of around $1 million US a year. And it will not take away from food security, it actually will enhance and improve food security for Belize because we consume that, and if we produce it locally, we don't need to import. So it does the opposite of what Senator speaks to. It improves food security. So we're looking at using and being strategic, using strategic trade policy to develop local manufacturing, to generate investment, employment, and save foreign exchange while improving food security. So, Madam President, I think for all these reasons, I think I fully support this bill. Thank you.
Recognize Senator Glenfield Dennison.
It's with a G, Madam President. Glenfield. I had a hard time spelling it in preschool too, so sorry. You reminded me of when I used to have to buy the case, Senator Favre. Case of ramen noodles, that time on Publix, on the canal side, it really was $12 for the case of 24. I had to buy the case every payday because it formed a substantial part of my lunch. And I was sharing with Senator Chinona that dearly departed friend of my, well, his mom, who's now dearly departed, used to be the one whose house I would go and cook my ramen at 12 o'clock. So, this one kind of close to home. That was my lunch, Madam President. So, this is like a big man job, and let's be real, like we're not the top. This is not a whole over, this was my lunch, right? So I support this bill in principle, but I'm really glad that Senator Koyi spoke before me, because the question I had was in fact really whether this was a piecemeal approach or a strategic plan towards our trade policy. So thank you for that intervention, Senator Koyi. I was hoping you would go a little bit more in detail to explain to us whether we're planning on protecting the several industries that hit home at food security, whether agricultural, fisheries, or manufacturing would benefit from some sort of structured policy where you don't have to have a question that you will have at the point where you invest $25 million, can then approach the government to change the tariffs, but whether you can come to benefit from some things like these up front, you know, because a lot of people don't know, but they got a difference in the taste of different ramen noodles, right? Respectfully, I don't expect many people up here to know. I taste one every so often just to remind myself, you know. Real, yeah, I reach. Like, let's be clear, me reach. Like I have to go buy around. I can't tell her the price. Can we just pick it up and put it in the basket? No. Thank God for that. But there's a real difference in the taste of different ramen. And the point I want to make is people decide where different ramen they want. I like the creamy chicken one myself. Now we could put Italian sausage in it and sauce and it after. We could buy running double and cut it up and make it into a gourmet ramen, you see. But the point I want to make is that we do really need to encourage the manufacturers to align their production with not only what can feed Belize, but what can put Belize competitively in the export market, in terms of flavor, in terms of taste, in terms of economies of scale for their production. And so I applaud efforts like this, because this is one tool that companies like these can use. And my ask is that we step forward, letting the government policy know that Belize is here for business, and that where you are producing things in Belize that can feed Belize and also help to improve Belize's position externally, that we as a government will support those types of initiatives. And so with that, I yield, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Gabriel Zetina.
Good morning, colleagues, Madam President. Madam President, to me this looks like or it might appear as a minor amendment, but for Belizeans, this is a direct attack on their survival. Rightfully so, Senator Denison. I too, growing up, used to eat ramen. I had to stick on a budget. And so I would have eaten it during lunch and dinner. And overall, because I didn't need a stove, I didn't have one. So it was quite easy to make, quick to make. And I can only imagine how many other students, families who are struggling, rely on ramen as a necessity. And I also agree with my colleague, Senator Faber, that this agreement may appear as one taxing the poor. Because I've mentioned, ramen is something that many, especially the working class, enjoys. So, when you have a senator talking about this is strategic trading, because they're trying to structure a tax system that works for whom? That should be the question. You're structuring the tax for whom? Because Belizeans must have options. Ramen already going up. Right now, for a single pack ramen, it's $1.50. Growing up was 75 cents. The timing, we're in a global world crisis where fuel has gone up, utilities have gone up, cost of living has gone up. So, I don't think that question would ever be answered, would it? Who are we structuring this for? I encourage, or what I would probably want to see is the list of company who we import ramen from. Today, I was made to understand that we have one particular company in Belize who actually makes ramen. That's good. I probably want to see more. But the bill also says that CARICOM would be paying 0%. So, are most of the ramen that we import come from CARICOM or not? Because then this is useless. If we're doing this so that we can help the Belizean people, then it's good. Because if most of the imported ramen is not coming from CARICOM, then all you're doing is increasing 20%, which to the importers, which is then passed on to the consumer, which is the Belizean people. And that is that goes against what I believe we're here for, which is for the Belizean people to ensure that some relief can be given to them, especially during this time. Thank you, colleagues.
I recognize Senator Sheena Pitts.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope I don't cause too much discomfort to my colleagues in these chambers and Belizeans listening to me, because I'm struggling through an unlawful occupant in my throat. And I hope by pushing through today, that fella will be evicted, because he's a man, only a man would do that. Madam President, I hear Senator Koi on strategic trade policy. What I think needs to happen is a sharp focus into people first policies. Senator Dennison, I hear your reference to this ramen being your meal, not by choice. Now you make money, you buy steak. But it appears, and it has shown itself over time, that people have been down so long that they begin to think that down is up. We glorify struggle, oppression, and everything, so much so that our talented Belizeans in Lake Independence, they held a cook-off of how good you can be creative in making ramen noodles. Madam President, no disrespect to people who thrive on ramen noodles. Ramen noodles is empty food. Ramen noodles provide the minimum, least nutrient-rich food for the body. And I recall the last parliamentary term, I attended a meeting hosted with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the focus there was food health security, where the move has to be made from unhealthy to healthy, where there was a concerted decision at that time that we must promote healthy eating. And therefore, you hear gardens at school and in community spaces. And so I ask myself, here we are looking at ways to promote a local manufacturer, which I will not slam too much, but I wonder how he won. For produce what food that is sickening our people. This region is leading with lifestyle diseases. hypertension, diabetes. These things are from food. And I am sure by now, people have seen the reports coming out on the effects of noodles on the body. What it is made from, how harmful it is. And so, yes, I understand that this is what people resort to because it is what they can afford. But what is this government doing to promote healthy food choices? We are giving a break to a no-navel string barrier Belizean company, as opposed to Belizean farmers with farm carrots and a myriad of other fruits and vegetables. Where, along with this strategic trade policy, is there any consideration for make we provide respite to Belizean farmers against importation for fruits and vegetables that we grow here, so that at least on a balance we have on the market healthy food choices for Belizean people, and paramount to that, healthy food choices that are affordable. Now you tell me, what is the government's policy on kind and quality for food? Do they have one? This term, you have to ask by term, you know. In fact, you have to ask by minister, because they change a musical chairs go on when man mess up. And I want to see, I really want to see, what are the numbers for the locally produced noodles versus the imported one that is telling me they need a little help for competition on the market. But Senator Denison, you said something very important. The top noodles on the market is Maruchan and Nissin and some Nangshim. I know there are a lot of Korean ones. And you're right. People's palate have a preference. And you know which one flies off the market, off the shelf? Maruchan, Top Ramen. Better you than me, boy, I want to live long. And so we are telling Belizeans that we will go and interfere in fair, healthy competition so that we choose for them. And there will be people who will say, man, I like what I like. Make I spend my $3 on the one noodles. That's the way we put people in the position to decide. When will Belize take a concerted effort to make policies that influence the long life of its citizens in Europe? Take, for example, England. My goodness, their old age population is large. The amount of banned products they have. And the banned products and the quality of food in the market directly correlates to the long life of the people. My flabbers were gusted, Senator Chanona, when I had to, be nice, mommy, when my son insisted he wanted fast food in the UK. And so my only way to say, all right, let's try, was because in the fast food restaurant, they had a vegan option as well as the fast food option. And they have signs to tell you what is in it. I went further. I said, make a taste the nuggets, provided I not swallow it. And I was shocked to find out that that thing was really chicken. What I am saying, Madam President, we say we have adopted a strategic trade policy to develop local manufacturing. For the one Chinaman, the Orange Walk, where they make ramen noodles, I don't know who and he and a friend make he to get this. I don't know. But if that is the case, and that could be the case, but what I am saying is, how is it we're doing only this on the one side and we're not doing the other on the other side for the health of this nation? I cannot, in good conscience, especially because I'm more health food minded. Yeah, tell me I eat bird food all day, I will take that. But it can't be that we will promote legislation that only looks at, right down your nose, no further than your nose, short-term fixes as opposed to long-term fixes for the health of the nation. Because whether it is affordable or not, whether people decide to bite the bullet and pay whatever it costs for the brand they prefer, the bottom line is this is an empty food that does no good for the body and the health of our Belizean people. So what we should be looking at, if it is we're going to do something like this, be balanced, man. Look at what can be done on the side of farmers, the agricultural industry. What is the Ministry of Health input in relation to oversaturating the market with noodles where citizens consume? What that will look like on our health. And I know they talk about 10 years. I know they talk about 15 years, 20 years. These are effects within a parliamentary term, within months. And healthcare in Belize is expensive, Madam President. People, they fight for afford food amidst high cost of living. And for sure, they will fight for afford healthcare. Because the effects on the body of these kinds of food, they pass primary health care, you know, they go to secondary health care problems and services, tertiary health care problems and services. So I just cannot, in good conscience, see that we can focus on challenging fair competition this way in the guise of promoting trade policy when there is nothing coming, there is nothing available to at least balance. And like Senator Farber said, Taiwan has been an ally to Belize for years. They remain committed no matter which party is in government. And we are saying to them, through this, we're going to take a hostile measure. Because I see this as hostile in relation to them. Why you never put all 50% per goods where they call for Guatemala? Put that 100%. Tax that one out from coming into the market. Not our friendly sisters in diplomacy. And so I say, Madam President, because you know at the end of the day, they are past them bill, you know. But what I expect, and I commend the government to do, get serious about policies that are directed to the health of the nation. Get serious about policies that are meant to benefit more than just one person or one operator, because only one manufacturer in the market. You have many Belizean farmers. Why? We have many Belizean farmers. What are we doing? Because remember, they experience time and time again loss of crop. When we decide we want to import from neighbors, when they, And it might be true because they must not give political contribution. For daily $5 or $10 profit where they make care go to nobody campaign. No, but I mean, come on. Farmers face crisis all the time. How many times have we seen news coverage where potatoes rot? Where carrots abundant? Recently, we had a short little breeder for farmers. When the cartels decided no trucks to the past, and they make nobody come in. So everything where we grow here had to sell. And I believe in Bill believes, you know. But I believe more in taking measures that benefit the majority and not the few. And if we're doing this for the one manufacturer, come with something next that I can support wholeheartedly for Belizean farmers, that we can put our money back into them because the price of imported fruits and vegetables gone so high. And let me tell you, that hurt me, you know, because a lot of the fruits and vegetables I prefer to eat than the imported one. So I talk against my own interest. But that is how much I believe in things to benefit the majority. Lord, Senator Courtney. When I want artichoke and that kind of thing. When I want asparagus and that kind of thing. The other day, my heart beat fast. I want to bring portobello mushroom back to Belize because I never had none for a while. I said, they lock me up for bringing things one up for bringing. And I'm law-abiding, so I no longer had those concerns. But the point I'm making is, build Belize for Belizeans. Do something for the farmers that will translate to a healthy population, longer life. Many people ain't live long enough to keep voting on out. No why not die, no get a vote or kill half in 5 years, man. This thing is serious. I feel so passionate about this. Ramen noodles, no matter how much they want poor people struggle food. They don't want healthy food. People shouldn't be consuming it. I respect people who eat it. Man, when I said that take a stomach and a half. And you know one of the reasons why I'm so against this ramen noodles thing? I will tell you, Madam President. When I went off to university, my second university degree, Wednesday I learned I was due in school. No, Tuesday. Wednesday I went to see the Minister of Education. That same Wednesday I learned, yeah, you can't live in the condition you would want to make life a little bit cushion. Thursday I decided I'm not going anywhere. Friday my father said no and put me on a plane. And the monies I took with me, I paid all my rent and bought all my books. What was left was so meager that I got introduced to ramen. And I was down to eating 1 ramen a day. No, I mean that extreme for people, but you know, me only need a little bit for survive. But it is still extreme because it's the empty food. When I came back home after the first semester, I had the opposite effect on my mom. When my sister came back home, she come back rosy. When I come back home bag of bones. And I resented that a 1 ramen noodle I had to eat per day to get through until things were a little bit more stable, because I said, I not be the spoiled child we call for mommy and daddy every time. I take this lick. And so I didn't complain and I didn't call home. The consequences on my health after that first semester was so severe. So it can't be, and I'm making a passion plea because I've experienced it. It can't be that people were done back up in our corner for only afford noodles. You have to take away their preference for the kind of noodles without any reprieve for them to even access healthier food on the market grown by Belizeans who outnumber the one manufacturer. And so I say, Madam President, fine, have your strategic trade policy. But what is not fine is that there is no national health policy that looks into the future for the health of the nation. That there is no targeted initiative meant to assist Belizean farmers who grow food that we eat. Our culture that we eat grown food. Every Saturday, some restaurant make buy up. So I implore, having associated myself with those views from Senator Farber, I implore the government, take into consideration doing things for Belizean farmers so we can truly say that when we buy Belize, we build Belize. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Pastor Lewis Wade.
Colleagues, good morning, Madam President. I think it was wisdom to select, it's wisdom to select 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. Because this ramen thing, it's got us going. It's got us going as the first item. But I want to say that noodles feeds all of Asia, an entire continent. And it is the healthiest continent in that when you look at the age that people live, the length of their lifespan, places like Japan and South Korea, China itself, you will see that they are very healthy. I said noodles, not necessarily ramen, because there is a difference. And I think we need to understand the difference, because there is an entire culture in the same way that we have rice as our substantial carbohydrate food. There are those in our culture that have corn as the foundation food. There are those that have flour, and there are those that have the cassava or the yam. But there is, every culture around the world has the base food where they get the energy to move around. And so noodles, which comes from rice or some type of flour, and there are different types. Ramen is, in a way, the commercialized version. But I want to say that in certain Asian countries, noodles form the base of some Michelin 5-star restaurants. Yes, that you pay expensive money for. So let us expand our understanding of how the world works. That is important if, as Belizeans, we are going to embrace development and compete with the rest of the world, which is something that I am always in favor of. I want my nation to develop. And so noodles is now being embraced, yes, in the form of this thing called ramen, but on the streets of places like Vietnam, South Korea, the markets use the ramen as the foundation for a very fast and cheap food for the masses. So if Belizeans are eating only ramen, that may in itself be a low nutrient food. But if they drop an egg in there, and many Belizeans know this and use it that way, you drop an egg in there, it changes everything. Because your protein content now is in the egg along with the base food of ramen. If you grow in your backyard just okra, Creole okra, you can take the okra, add it to your ramen, and you have a high nutrient food. If you grow kalalo, and I want to encourage Belizeans to grow kalalo. In my backyard, I have a garden. I have added tilapia to my garden. And I have, over the last 5 years since the pandemic, seek to educate Belizeans how to very cheaply and affordably increase the nutrition in their food. So you do not have to eat only ramen. A small amount of creativity or work can use whatever you have in your backyard. Kalalo, chop it up, put it in your ramen, and you have a high nutrient food. So I will start there because just like how we have tacos for breakfast, and just like how we have meat pie for breakfast, and it's readily available, there is no reason why you can't be like Vietnam and South Korea, where $1 you grab ramen, which will go for 1 minute, add something to it, and you can start sell a breakfast for $3 and you become an entrepreneur with ramen. And I think that's the direction that we need to go to teach our grassroots people how to improve their life. You can start a business with ramen. You can start to sell $3 breakfast by adding something to it. And I want to congratulate the entrepreneur. Is it the same guy who started off with a kind of bear and then added a kind of water and now he's on to noodles? It's the same guy, right? It's the same company out of Orange Walk. That's a keeper. That's a kind of investor that we want to incentivize. He started with one product. I don't drink beer. Boy. What I support is a good entrepreneur. I love good ideas. I love people who take the right kind of risk. And so I've been watching the company, including really bad news when they had to, anyway. But clearly, if he has started with alcoholic beverage, and he has moved on to water, and now he is on noodles. Why is that not a keeper? He's going to move on to something else, because he's seeing the economic possibilities, is he not? If he is on to at least his third product that I know of, in the next few years, then I expect him to study the economy, and a fourth product is going to go on the shelf that is made in Belize, that all of us should be rejoicing over. And so I congratulate him. Because, yeah, probably more than I'm thinking about. Because now we have another group of people that are thinking not just about importing and selling to the Belizean people, but they are thinking about producing it in Belize. So, I want to track the importation of noodles or ramen, because many of these companies in some of these Asian countries, they come from a socialist or communist background, so the government don't own half of the product, and the government is subsidizing ramen. It's subsidizing it. So here you have a Belizean company that's not only competing with the import, but they're competing with a product that's coming in that's heavily subsidized. In other countries, farmers are heavily subsidized. And so you are already competing with a product that is very low because either the government owns half of the company or it's a heavily subsidized food. And so what happens when the importer gets on the telephone, he orders ramen from a country where it is very cheap and plentiful, and it lands in Belize. It's a small group of Belizeans that are going to load it to a container, and then the job done. It got to a warehouse, they unload it, and then job done. The next place they're going from there is on the shelf, where a few people are going to sell it, and it goes out to the public. The end. So here we have an entrepreneur who now will either source raw materials from in-country, which is the same farmers that we are talking about, and convert that into ramen. It will take vegetables, the same farmers that we are talking about that are Belizeans, he will eventually have to buy from these Belizean farmers, things that he was not buying before. And then thirdly, whatever he imports, the people will still load and unload, put in the warehouses and bring to where? Not to the consumer, it goes to the factory. To the factory. So what happens at the factory? A group of people who would never be employed because of an import are now employed because you are making a product. Never thought I had to explain that to our Belizean people. That once you're not importing the product and you're making it locally, you need an investment for a factory, you need employment for a factory, and some of your raw materials will be sourced in country. So is it that we don't know that, or we want people to not know that? That this is a major development in our country, that we can now produce a product, ramen. I don't eat ramen. I don't eat ramen, and I don't travel on public transport. I cannot sit in a bus terminal for an hour to wait for the bus to go. With ramen, I prefer my natural food. So we're trying to put impossible situations that we ourselves don't experience, we're trying to put it on other people. So you know what? Yes, I don't eat ramen, but I can see the massive benefit that this company is giving to Belize. So even though I don't eat it, I can say this is a good idea. We need more of this, even if I don't participate in it directly. With foreign exchange, it is helping. With employment, it is helping. With the natural products that the farmers produce, it is helping. This is a win-win, even if we don't eat ramen. And so I'm going to close with this. We need to move now from ramen to maybe ketchup. There are more products that we need to stop importing or reduce importing or create a temporary increased importation so that more local products can flourish. And you know, for us I have a small television station. You know why television is difficult in Belize? Because we're importing all the products nobody wants to advertise. But I bet you for that ramen that is locally made, no advertisement they play internationally. They have to create a local advertisement. So our social media influencers, they will soon make a little money from the local products as well. The advertisers, I hope they will come and start to advertise the local product. You see, when products are imported and made from outside, there is no advertisement for cultural programming. But when products are made in Belize, many different industries benefit. And so I support this bill.
Madam President, I think it's important to remember the purpose of the bill before the Senate. the debate ranged far and wide on policy issues and matters that was not a part of the bill or the purpose of the bill. And so I want to start by thanking Pastor Wade, Senator Wade, for bringing us back to what the purpose of the legislation seeks to achieve. There are a number of things that have been said that need to be responded to. First of all, Madam President, this bill was not designed to promote or to advance a health policy. Having said that, however, the impression was given that ramen is bad and therefore unhealthy, and therefore we should not support the objective of the legislation. Senator Wade quite rightly pointed out that there are hundreds of millions of people across this world for whom noodles, including ramen, is their basic foodstuff. There is no doubt that Senator Pitts is correct, that the high sodium content in ramen noodles in particular, and the lack of nutrients in the noodles makes it essentially an unhealthy basic foodstuff. However, once it is supplemented with nutrients or protein, for example, that equation changes. So what we have, Madam President and colleagues, is a situation where, as a matter of fact, for many Belizeans, this basic foodstuff is an important and affordable part of their diet. We have a choice. I listened carefully. Senator Pitts didn't go as far as I thought she was going to go. I thought she was going to advocate for a banning of the importation of ramen. If it is so unhealthy, why do we not ban the retailers who are profiting of importation of goods not made in Belize, sold to Belizeans at a markup, no tax? Should we ban that because it's bad? Should we ban soft drinks? Should we ban importation of alcohol? On and on it goes. The purpose of the legislation, Madam President, is, as Senator Cowie pointed out, you have inputs that are taxed. In order to attempt to level the playing field, we are permitted by our international obligations and trade obligations to move the applied rate on products. And what this has done is to say, insofar as we have a local producer, we are going to give that local producer some protection that is permitted under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. It allows us to move the applied rate as high as the bound rate, or in this case, to the MFN rate, and 20%. Therefore, the local producer who is creating employment, who is saving foreign exchange, who is investing in Belize, is able to have a competitive advantage versus those products imported from other countries, including Taiwan. We have an economic cooperation agreement with Taiwan that has a schedule of the products that have the benefit of a tax-free regime. This is not one. So this is not interfering with the agreement that we have with Taiwan. It is not. Madam President, it is important as a matter of philosophy, as put eloquently by Senator Wade, for us to make a choice between importers on one hand and a choice of producers on another. This bill is seeking to give a benefit to a producer, and we can focus as much as we want on who to promote the producer is. The issue is, are jobs for Belizeans being created? Is foreign exchange being saved? If the answer to that is yes, it is a net positive for Belize. It is incorrect to suggest that there are not policies in place that provide protection for farmers, that provide protection for the agricultural sector. Fertilizer, fungicide, insecticide, these are all zero-rated. And most importantly, we operate a licensing regime.
One moment, Leader Government Business. Senators on the opposition side, can we be silent as the Leader Government Business is speaking?
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as I was saying, we do operate a licensing regime that does not allow the importation of agricultural products at different times of the year when we have production by our local farmers. What we do have, and one of the problems we experience, is the contraband that comes across our borders and are put on the market at times when we have sufficient local production. In short, Madam President, we say that the bill seeks to put Belize and Belizeans first. It seeks to prioritize producers over importers. It seeks to promote investment in Belize, job creation in Belize, foreign exchange savings in Belize, and we commend it to our colleagues, and I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Customs and Excise Duties Act, Chapter 48 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to vary the rate of duty on soups and broths in solid or powder form, including ramen noodles and other related items in the customs tariff and trade classification, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Customs and Excise Duties Act, Chapter 48 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020.
Recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I seek your leave to take the next two bills together. They deal with the same topic.
You may proceed.
Grateful. And we have the agreement from my colleagues opposite on that issue. Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Act, Chapter 104 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to satisfy the requirements of the Financial Action Task Force recommendation with respect to digital assets and digital asset service providers, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, and a bill for an act to amend the Financial Services Commission Act No. 8 of 2023 to provide for the grant of a special license for trading in digital assets and other similar activities and operations, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President and colleagues, these two bills, which have been in the Senate from last year, seek to provide a regime for the offering of trading in digital assets, and to provide for a licensing of that regime, for the management of it, the regulation of it by the Financial Services Commission, and to allow Belize to offer this to persons who wish to do this type of trading.
I recognize Senator Patrick Faber.
To join you in congratulating Senator Chanona on her election, and of course as well to yet again congratulate my Archbishop, the Most Reverend Philip Wright, on his recognition service yesterday. And I join you in thanking those senators who attended. I certainly saw Senator Courtney, Senator Pitts. I'm not sure, you didn't go, not just Senator Wayne, but we had it live streamed courtesy of the government of Belize, and I want to place on record as well, Madam President, as a part of the Anglican Diocese, our appreciation to the government for all that was done to support Archbishop Philip Wright and the province. As one very high-ranking official of the government said, who I will not call his name, it couldn't have been done for a greater guy. Bishop Philip is really an authentic, genuine church leader. Not criticizing anybody else, but I am speaking from my own experience, and I believe that because of my family, no, that's not the reason, no. But yes, he's a cousin of mine, but I believe I can speak for many when I say that he's indeed a very genuine person. So I again place on record the gratitude of our Anglican Diocese of Belize to the government of Belize for the support that we had in carrying out the wonderful church service of recognition for Archbishop Philip Wright. Madam President, I agree with the Leader of Government Business that this bill, or these two bills, ought to be taken together because indeed they form a part of a single legislative project. The Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill and the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill are two pieces of paper, but they have one purpose. And together, Madam President, they open the door of this country to the regulated digital asset economy, as Senator Courtney said. Cryptocurrencies, stable coins, tokenized assets, distributed ledgers, digital wallets. It's a whole new vocabulary of the new financial frontier. A frontier, Madam President, that up until recently, very recently, our laws didn't address any at all, or only addressed, it was only addressed even if it was by way of temporary prohibition under Section 81 of the Financial Services Commission Act. A prohibition, Madam President, which by its own terms sunset on the 31st of December, was it, Senator Koyi, of last year. And so we are in some months now without any kind of regulation at all. Madam President, let me say from the outset, plainly and for the record, that the opposition supports the principle of both of these bills. We support, Madam President, the compliance with the Financial Action Task Force standards. We support the work of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. We support the integration of digital asset service providers in Belize's regulatory and anti-money laundering regimes. But we do so because we have learned through very hard experiences what happens to small open economies when it falls foul of the international financial integrity architecture. In fact, one of the reasons why we agreed to take the bills together is because really and truly we can talk about what is wrong, but if we don't move and move quickly, all sorts of things can happen to us. Things that have happened to us already in the past, and we took a very long while under the Barrow administration and under the PUP administration. We have worked hard at cleaning up and putting in the requirements that are expected of us, and so we definitely do not want to go back there. The Honorable Senate colleagues would remember, for instance, Madam President, the years of the de-risking crisis, the years when correspondent banking relationships were withdrawn from Belizean banks, the years when families sending remittances watched the cost of those transfers climb very high, the years when our financial sector struggled because we had failed to keep pace with a global standard that had moved without us. We do not, Madam President, and I repeat, on this side of the Senate, intend to repeat those mistakes. But, Madam President, supporting compliance is not the same as suspending scrutiny. And on a legislative package that opens the door of this country to one of the most volatile, opaque, and consequential financial sectors of our age, this Senate, Madam President, is duty-bound to ask the questions that the Belizean people would ask if given the floor. And I will address each bill, Madam President, in turn, briefly, and then turn to the cross-cutting concerns that apply to the regime taken as a whole. Firstly, the Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill. Madam President, this bill establishes the substantive licensing regime of digital asset service providers in Belize. It is in effect the gatekeeping instrument. It defines who may operate under what license, with what fit and proper requirements, and with what ongoing disclosure obligations. Without this bill, Madam President, the digital asset market in Belize has no regulatory issued passport. With it, the door opens wide. On the principle of establishing a special licensing regime, the opposition takes no objection, Madam President. A regulated regime is beyond question. It's preferable to the alternative which, since the sunset of the Section 81 prohibition in December last year, has been unregulated as a regime. So the policy direction, Madam President, again we repeat, is correct. But the questions for this bill are as follows. Firstly, the question of fit and proper testing. The digital asset sector has, in jurisdictions across the hemisphere, attracted operators whose conduct in prior regulatory environments would not survive a serious fit and proper review. This Senate is entitled to know what is the standard of the Commission, what standard will apply. Will the test extend not only to the directors and officers of the applicant entity, but to the ultimate beneficial owners as well? Will applicants be required to disclose all related entities in this and in other jurisdictions? Will politically exposed persons, PEP as they are called, be subjected to enhanced scrutiny? Will refusals be reasoned, and will they be reviewable? Second, Madam President, the question of public transparency comes to us. Will the Commission maintain and publish a register of all the DASPs licensed under this regime, including the identity of beneficial owners, to a meaningful threshold? The Belizean public is entitled to direct visibility into who is operating in this sector under our laws, and we have already seen this administration. Yes, he cut out. We have already seen this administration pass regulations, Madam President, that protect the identity of some of business entities operating in Belize that may well be of questionable character. So it's a practice already. So we have to take this kind of caution when we are looking to this kind of legislation. The Belizean people are entitled, Madam President, to direct visibility into who is operating in this sector under our laws, not as a privilege graciously extended, but as a precondition of public confidence. Thirdly, Madam President, the question of who is today knocking on the door. The Cabinet memorandum that was shared with us accompanies the companion bill, and I join to thank whoever was involved, Madam President, for sharing that white paper or cabinet paper as well as the white papers for the other pieces of legislation that we will be dealing with today and tomorrow, and I trust that it will be the practice. I know that for one of the bills we didn't get it today. I think it was the first one having to do with the customs amendment, but I'm assuming that it will be the practice rather than the exception that we get these bills. Or white paper, sorry. So the cabinet memorandum that accompanies the companion bill before us discloses that the Commission has been working toward what is called controlled and risk-based opening of digital asset market. The language suggests demand. It suggests that there are parties, entities, applicants, would-be licensees. And so we want to know, Madam President, who are these interested persons who are saying that they want to operate in Belize? Who? Has the Commission received expressions of interest? Are draft applications already in preparation? This is not a question of casting aspersions, Madam President. It is a question of legitimate public scrutiny before this chamber unlocks the door, whose nature on the other side, the Belizean public, has not yet been allowed to see. And then there's a fourth question, Madam President, the question that must be answered before any license is issued. What is the consumer protection architecture? I shall return to this in detail later, Madam President, but it cuts across both bills. But on the FSC Act amendment specifically, this Senate is entitled to know what custodial segregation requirements, what capital adequacy standards, what mandatory risk disclosures, and what, if any, compensation arrangements will attach to the special licensees under Section 81. I now turn to the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill. Madam President, the second bill in this package is the Integrity Instrument, where the FSC Act amendment opens the door. This bill ensures that what passes through the door is subject to the same anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism financing, and counter-proliferation financing discipline as every other reporting entity under the laws of Belize. It does this in 5 operative ways, we understand. 1, by adding digital asset service providers to the definition of financial institution in Section 2, by extending the corresponding due diligence regime in Section 15 to digital asset service relationships, by extending the wire transfer originator information requirements, what international practitioners call the travel rule. In Section 19, by adding digital asset services to Schedule 1 as a captured activity, and by naming the FSC as the supervisory authority under Schedule 3. On the principle again, Madam President, this side of the Senate takes no objection. These are amendments required by FATF, recommendation number 15, I think it is, and they are the price of admission to international financial integrity. The Cabinet memorandum shared its right to insist that failure to enact these provisions exposes Belize to a negative technical rating in the upcoming FATF mutual evaluation. That is a risk this country cannot afford to take. But 2 questions specific to this bill deserve the attention of this honorable House, Madam President. First, the breadth of the new definition of digital asset. As drafted, the definition captures, and I quote, any digital representation of a value or of a right that is able to be recorded, transferred, and stored electronically using distributed ledger technology or similar technology, end of quote. Madam President, or similar technology is the problem. 2 words, similar technology. For those who will say I can't count, or similar technology. 2 words, similar technology. The vehicle, the vehicle of considerable regulatory uncertainty. What is similar to distributed ledger technology? Is a centralized database operated by digital payments, a digital payment company captured? Is a tokenized loyalty point captured? Is a digital voucher captured? Is a central bank digital currency, should the central bank ever decide to implement one, captured? Breadth, Madam President, without clarity creates compliance costs for legitimate operators and avoidance opportunities for illegitimate ones. This Senate is entitled to ask what supervisory guidance the Commission will publish in advance of commencement to clarify the boundaries of the term. The second question we must ask on this bill, Madam President, the second issue is that of enforceability of the travel rule against transactions that, by their technical nature, bypass licensed intermediaries. The amendment, Madam President, to Section 19 imposes the originator information requirement on digital asset service providers, and it does so correctly. But this Senate must understand that blockchain transfers between self-hosted wallets, transactions on decentralized exchanges, and peer-to-peer movements that never touch a licensed DASP are, in technical terms, beyond the reach of any regulator anywhere in the world. We do not say the obligation should not be imposed. In fact, we say the opposite, it must be. We do say that this chamber, however, is entitled to know the Commission's enforcement strategy and where the limits of that strategy fall. Madam President, I now turn to the cross-cutting concerns that apply to both bills taken as a single regulatory project. And I begin with a question of timing that this honorable chamber must address. Cabinet memorandum that accompanies the AML bill states that, in clear terms, the temporary prohibition on digital asset activities under Section 81 of the Financial Services Commission Act sunset on the 31st of December 2025. We are now at the 27th day of April, calendar check, 2026. And Madam President, that is 117 days after the deadline, nearly 4 months in which the prohibition has lapsed, and during which time, on the government's own admission, there is a regulatory gap that has existed in this jurisdiction, and in a sector that the Cabinet memorandum itself describes as high risk. This Senate is entitled to ask, therefore, Madam President, what has happened in those 117 days? Has any digital asset activity been undertaken in or from Belize during that window? Have any entities held themselves out as DASPs in this jurisdiction without license and without supervision? Has the Financial Intelligence Unit received any reports? Has the Financial Services Commission identified any actors? And what is the legal status today of any transactions that took place in the gap between the sunset of the prohibition and the commencement of these bills, neither of which, by their own terms, is yet in force? I'm happy that Senator Coy is here because I think he holds the answers to these kinds of questions. And I'm hoping that he will be generous in sharing that information with us so that we can put these questions to rest. The Belizean public, Madam President, is entitled to know whether their country has, for the last 4 months, been operating in the very kind of regulatory vacuum that the Cabinet memorandum describes as high risk to be avoided. And then, Madam President, when the two bills are taken together, they make the Financial Services Commission the licensing authority, the supervisory authority, if you will, and the enforcement authority for digital asset service providers in Belize. With the greatest of respect to the dedicated officers of the Commission, who I know to be capable professionals, digital asset supervision, Madam President, is not banking supervision. It is not securities supervision. It is not insurance supervision. It is a specialized discipline that requires blockchain forensics, transaction tracing software, and an understanding of smart contracts. It requires, Madam President, familiarity with the architecture of decentralized exchanges and the capacity to conduct on-chain analysis in real time. This, Madam President, is the kind of supervisory capability that in jurisdictions that are far better resourced than ours has taken years to build. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, for instance, the Financial Conduct Authority of the United Kingdom, the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States. Each of these entities, Madam President, have invested tens of millions of dollars and dozens of specialized officers in building this capacity. And each, Madam President, I am certain nobody will dispute, they are still learning. So this Senate, Madam President, is entitled to ask, what capacity does the Commission have today to supervise this section? How many specialized officers exist here? Does the Commission have a contract with a chain analytics provider, a chain analysis, and elliptic, a TRM labs to support its supervisory function? Has it established a dedicated digital asset supervision unit? What is its budget? What is its staffing? And what is the training program that they will undertake? We do not say, Madam President, that this work cannot be done. We merely say that it cannot be done without resources. It cannot be done without training. And it cannot be done without time. And this Senate, Madam President, is entitled to know whether those have been provided. Have the resources been provided? Have the training been done? And has the time been put in? And I would want to say that even blind-eyed James, you can see that the time, that last category has not been looked at and has not been done. Granted, it is because we are pressed by our masters. Madam President, neither of these bills before us today, in their design, are consumer protection bills. The Money Laundering and Terrorism Amendment is concerned with the integrity of the financial system. The FSC Act amendment is concerned with the licensing and the supervision. These are properly their concerns. But the entry of digital asset service providers into the Belizean economy raises a question that neither of these bills address, and that the Belizean people will, sooner than this chamber may wish, be confronted by. FTX, Celsius, Voyager, BlockFi, Three Arrows Capital, Genesis, Mt. Gox before them. The cascade of digital asset failures of the past several years, named there. In each of these failures, Madam President, retail customers, ordinary depositors, ordinary holders, ordinary investors lost, in aggregate, tens of billions of United States dollars. In each, the licensed regulators in the relevant jurisdictions had assured the public, in very much the same way that I'm sure we are going to try to assure the Belizean public here, that the platforms were safe. In each, the consumer protection mechanisms were either absent or inadequate to the scale of the loss. Madam President, when a Belizean depositor places funds with a commercial bank, those deposits are, to a defined limit, protected by the Deposit Insurance Corporation under the Banks and Financial Institutions Act. When a Belizean places funds with a credit union, comparable protections apply, Madam President. But when a Belizean, and they will, place funds with a digital asset service provider licensed under this regime, what protection do they have if that provider becomes insolvent? If its custodial wallets are hacked, if its operators abscond, if a smart contract on which their assets depend is exploited. Both bills, Madam President, are silent in this regard. The Cabinet memorandum shared with us, Madam President, white paper, is silent in this regard. The Belizean consumer in this emerging sector will operate without the safety net they enjoy in every other regulated corner of our financial system in this country. We ask the government, what is the consumer protection architecture that will accompany the digital asset regime? Custodial segregation requirements, capital adequacy floors, mandatory disclosures, an insurance bond, a compensation scheme. The recent history of this sector tells us very clearly that the worst does happen. The Belizean consumer is entitled to know what stands between them and that worse before they are invited to participate. Madam President, I owe it to this Honorable House to address directly and without evasion the question that hangs over both bills, whether or not it is spoken, the question of Belize's history with offshore financial institutions. This country has, over the past 3 decades, been the home of an international banking sector, an international business companies regime, an offshore trust sector, and other financial structures at various points in the history have brought us out into difficult conversations with international standard setters. We have made progress, as I described, for both of the last administration and this administration. We have closed many of the loopholes. We have repealed the IBC Act. We have brought our economic substance regime into compliance. Often under significant external pressure, we have worked to clean up reputational concerns that, fairly or not, attached to this jurisdiction. These 2 bills, Madam President, open a new chapter, the digital asset sector. And the digital asset sector has, in jurisdictions across the Caribbean and beyond, become the new frontier of the very anxieties that previously attached to the older offshore industries. The Bahamas with FTX learned that the hard way. Other jurisdictions in our regions have grappled with similar concerns. So the question this Senate must, in good conscience, ask is this: what has been learned from the Belizean past that will be applied to the Belizean digital asset future? The Belizean people are entitled to know, Madam President, that the lessons of the past have informed the architecture of the future, and the digital asset sector in Belize will not become, by neglect or by design, a vehicle for the very risks that brought us to the FATF table in the first place. And this is very real, you know, Madam President. Very real. We have gone down this road before, and we have to raise it because the nature in which these bills come to us, and I'm not necessarily beating up on the government on it, because, as I've said, it has happened under both administrations. But if it is that we are putting in these pieces of legislation in order to comply and not necessarily to safeguard and to look out for the Belizean people, we will find ourselves with history repeating itself. We will find ourselves and our people in serious problems. Madam President, the opposition supports the principle of both of these bills. We will not stand in the way of measures essential to Belize's compliance with international standards and to our understanding in the upcoming CFATF mutual evaluation. But our support is not unconditional. In the spirit of constructive scrutiny, we make the following requests of the government. One, that the government table on the record of this Senate, be put on the record of this Senate, a full account of any digital asset activity that has occurred in or from Belize in the period between the sunset of Section 81 prohibition on the 31st of December 2025 and today, or rather, well, yes, we can't go further than today. That the government commit, secondly, on the floor of this Senate, that the commencement of both bills will be coordinated so that no DASP may be licensed without simultaneous supervisory coverage. 3, that the Financial Services Commission table, before commencement, a published statement of its supervisory capacity in respect of digital assets, specialized staff, training, blockchains, analytics tools, and dedicated budget, so that this Senate may know that the supervisory mandate these bills confer is matched by the capability to discharge it. 4, that the government bring forward before any DASP license is issued a consumer protection framework appropriate to the digital asset sector, including a minimum custodial segregation requirements, capital adequacy standards, mandatory risk disclosures to retail consumers, and a clear position on whether a compensation scheme will apply. That the Commission publishes in advance of commencement supervisory guidance clarifying the boundaries of the definition of the term digital asset, particularly the meaning of similar technology, together with its enforcement strategy for the travel rule under the amended Section 19 of the Principal Act. That the Commission maintain a register of all DASPs licensed under this regime, including the identity of beneficial owners to a transparent threshold, so that the Belizean public, Madam President, has direct visibility into who is operating in this sector. And finally, Madam President, that the Commission report annually to this Honorable Senate on the operation of the digital asset regime, or to the National Assembly, number of licenses issued, jurisdictions of beneficial owners, value of their assets under custody, suspicious activity reports filed, enforcement actions taken, and consumer complaints received, so that this chamber and the lower house as well, Madam President, may carry out its constitutional duty of oversight in fact and not merely in form. In closing, Madam President, the question before us is not whether Belize should comply with international financial integrity standards. There's no question about that. We must and we will. The question is not whether digital asset service providers should be licensed and supervised. They must, and these bills achieve that purpose. The question, though, Madam President, is whether the broader policy decisions these bills usher in, the decision to open Belize to the regulated digital asset economy, is being made with the institutional preparation, the consumer protection architecture, and the public transparency that a decision of this magnitude requires. This is, in financial sector terms, a frontier moment. The decisions taken in this chamber today, Madam President, will shape for years to come the kind of digital asset jurisdiction that Belize becomes. A serious jurisdiction is what we want, one with high standards, one with robust supervision, and one with meaningful consumer protection. Our jurisdiction, a jurisdiction of convenience, where the sun shines, the bandwidth is adequate, the regulatory questions are not too sharply pressed, and the lessons of FTX, of Mt. Gox, and of the de-risking years are quietly forgotten. That's what we want. Or what we don't want, sorry. Madam President, I caution this Honorable House. Pass the bills. Comply with the standards. Protect our financial sector from the catastrophe of the adverse CFATIF rating. But understand that we are doing more than amending 2 schedules. We're unlocking a door, and we owe it to the Belizean people to know what stands on the other side of that door before we turn the key. Thank you.
Recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Good morning, Madam President. Madam President, I think that we've seen a constant move within our economy towards modernization, and I think these 2 bills here are certainly bills that are going in that direction. And I think that it's important for us to embrace these, how the global economy is going, and for us to get at pace with it. But it's also important, Madam President, that we do it properly. And I think that when we're looking at digital assets, Madam President, and digital assets are, for those who may not know, I think there are 3 qualifying criteria. One, it must be stored on a device or server. It must have a value, and you must have ownership to it. And so I think that, and some examples of these, Madam President, would be like brand assets, logos, media content. In the financial, you have Bitcoin, Ethereum, stable coins. And those are just some examples of what it is, Madam President. So it's very, very new. The point I'm making is it's a very new area for Belize, even though we've seen it so many times on the news, and especially in the financial news, where other countries are moving very fast towards it. And I think Bitcoin is the flagship, if you will, of what it is. But there are also considerable risks that comes along with it, as Senator Faber mentioned in his presentation. Madam President, I think if we look at the example of Turkey had gone down this road. They had all types of issues with it from a fraud standpoint, and those who defrauded the system. And they miraculously were able to bring it back, but only after they decided that they needed to, one, bite the bullet, but as well make an example of those who tried to defraud the system, and tighten up on the regulations as well. And so I'm saying all of this, Madam President, again to sound the caution that yes, I think it's an extremely important step that we're taking today. But it's also very important, Madam President, that we try to do it right. I think we can all remember the whole de-risking exercise that went on throughout the world a couple of years ago, where Belize, some of these banking institutions in Belize lost their correspondent banking relationships. And so while it's a slightly different area, sometimes these things have a tendency to affect each other. We certainly would not want to go down that road again if we can avoid it. But certainly, Madam President, is that there are risks that comes along with it. You know, I mentioned debanking, which is certainly an area that I think we have to keep in mind. I think there's the issue of capital flight, and we've seen this again globally over a period of time, where people get into the bitcoins and the cryptos and are able to move capital very, very easily, and a lot of times out of the reach of your own internal central bank, or in the US case, the Treasury. And so it's important that the regulatory and the oversight mechanisms are equipped where they can track these types of transactions. I know blockchain goes a far way in terms of that whole monitoring and tracking of it, but it's important that we internally are able to do that as well, Madam President. And so my issue with the legislation, again, is not the modernization part of it, but I don't think we've had sufficient information to feel comfortable that we are there from a regulatory standpoint, that we're there from a tracking standpoint, that we're there from a standpoint where we can make sure that we are protecting the overall economy, that we're protecting the overall banking system. I think it's also important, Madam President, that we also protect the integrity of our own dollar. And again, I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that something bad will happen to our currency, but it's possible that it can. And so I'm saying that it's important that we make sure that we put in all the safeguards that are possible. Madam President, we're moving into a world of smart contracts, stable coins, like I mentioned, decentralized finance. We have to make sure that we have the tools to track these and to track these assets. As well, do we have the technical personnel to look past what we've had as a business plan, and to look at the actual code of these platforms? It's extremely, extremely, extremely important, Madam President, because things in this area can move very fast, and it can move in a very big way. And so the impact can be tremendous. Again, you go back to the experience of Turkey, and it's one of those examples. There were several countries, I think, that had some of those experiences that were not so great in terms of the moving into digital assets. And so I sung those caution, Madam President, simply to say that I would like for us to have some more information in terms of how it would be regulated, what the oversight will be. I know that the Commission is being put in place to do some of this, but what type of budget will we have behind it? How will we access the technical expertise? How will we even access the technology to do some of these? Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Janelle Janona.
Madam President, before I start on this, Madam President, with your leave, I'll join the Senate in congratulating Archbishop Wright on his ceremony yesterday. I wasn't able to be there physically, but I certainly am so very proud to know the good gentleman. He certainly answered the call to feed and mind my flock. I also thank members for supporting the work of the Parliamentarians for Global Action. If you have not, I extend a a strong word of encouragement for members to consider joining the organization. And I thank the Office of the President of the Senate for sharing the latest petition in calling for peace, and encourage members to review the petition and consider signing, given the impacts and the gravities of what is happening there. I will also align myself with gratitude for the white paper and other materials that have been brought to the Senate ahead of this meeting, Madam President. I do not think it can be overstated how important the amount of information that we can get to further add to our discussions and deliberations here are. So I thank you. Turning to this bill, Madam President, I will only align with the comments that I think begin to describe that in many ways the world is trying to catch up with this technology. I will tell you, and Senator Pitt knows I like her sayings, but my flabbers were also gasted, Madam President, when you reconcile that, I mean, people were trading these, you know, these restaurant cards and these Apple cards for credit because it's currency, and using this to pay for illicit activities. And then the other day I was in the airport and someone says to me, says, Janelle, you know, that digital form that you're filling out, leaving the country and coming in, have we ever asked where this data is being stored and how it's being protected? And you go into some stores and you use your credit card and you have to include an email address. Like, do we think about how our digital assets and our face recognition and our fingerprints and all of this is being protected? So I think it is clear that we can and we should and we must support these types of legislative steps, but also for us to frame that this is Herculean in asking, and hopefully not Sisyphus, but Herculean in trying to figure out how we will enforce something that has been manipulated and will continue to be manipulated by bad actors to be elusive and to be unregulated and to operate certain aspects of this to their own ends. So I will second on making sure that, given the tremendous task that is before the Financial Services Commission, that we look at, and perhaps, Madam President, this would be good to come back to on harping on the parliamentary calendar of a package of legislative steps that can be taken as a whole, so that as we're doing these steps that we see where the end game is, or we see where the goal is, and we can track how we're getting to that as part of a big picture, and making sure that the gaps are already highlighted and we can chart our progress forward. But I support the bill, Madam President, and I look forward to the ongoing legislation that we will have to consider in making sure that that is bolstered and that it's worked, because it's working. Because it's one thing for us to pass the legislation here, but if it's not doing what it has, as my colleagues have highlighted, then the national implications and the impact of that will be significant, and we have to go in eyes open to that reality and what is before us, given where the world is with this technology. I thank you.
I recognize Senator Gabriel Zetina.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to speak on this bill, and before I offer my contributions, I want to say that we on the opposition do support this bill. And so part of my contribution is to help the Belizean people understand what these amendments are about, and also offer some suggestions to strengthen the bill. So, Madam President, this amendment, to me, should not be underscored. It's a great initiative because the previous bill did talk about regulating the financial sector, but excluding what it is doing today. And so expanding the existing legal framework into a new space is something we support. And so what it is doing, this amendment, it is adding a space for digital assets, like many of our previous senators have stated before, focusing on cryptocurrency and digital finance. I have many friends who've told me about cryptocurrency, and I personally not involved, but I can see how the young people are becoming more and more involved, and they do make money with cryptocurrency, also from trading, using that money to purchase and sending products into Belize. To me, allowing us to be able to regulate it so that they're operating on a safe environment, it's something that we must apply. And under the original act, it made provisions, but I believe it was focused on more of a traditional way of regulating the financial sector. Those focus on banks, insurance companies, brokerage firms. And now, under this amendment, we can start introducing the digital service providers. And so, the amendment gives space for defining what the digital assets are, the services, and who qualifies as a provider. And so, Madam President, what was once a law for bank is now a law for crypto, allowing, like I said at the beginning, many young people to become involved. Section 15, which the previous bill dealt strictly with correspondent bank relationships. And so now with this amendment, it expands that. And now we would be able to deal with correspondents who are dealing with digital assets and service relations. And so it means that crypto platform must verify who they deal with, ensuring that we're not engaging with shell companies, and ensuring that proper due diligence is conducted, KYC, know your customer or client's phone. But for us, which I will make suggestion at the end, ensuring that we're having the right personnel to enforce the law would be vitally important so that we can avoid suspicion, transaction, money laundering. And so, Madam President, the same rules that apply to the bank we're now seeing being applied to the crypto platform. I notice as well that in this amendment, it brings the FSC, the Financial Service Commission, who would be the regulator. And so anyone dealing with cryptocurrency, from my understanding, it's stating that They must be licensed, assuming that FSC would be granting those licenses. They must be monitored, and they must comply with the regulatory standards. And so, Madam President, crypto is soon no longer going to be in the shadows, and it is now, we can expect it being a form of trading in everyday persons or businesses. Schedule 1 and Schedule 3, the bill goes further and it adds to digital assets activities. Those include exchange, storage, transfer, and management of those assets, and assigns the oversights to the Financial Service Commission. And so, Madam President, every major aspect of the digital activities is now being brought into law. And I must applaud that the amendment is being driven by international standards. And so Belize now, like many other countries, must comply with those requirements set by the global financial bodies. But we must also ensure and be honest, because while all what I have stated is necessary, we must be ready to ensure that we have the technical capacity, the right trained personnel, and the systems in place. So, with that being said, are we ready to properly monitor and enforce this law? Because passing this piece of legislation or bill is one thing, but in Belize, enforcing, sometimes we tend to lack. But not to end on a negative side note, this is very much encouraging for many young Belizeans. I can't wait to go back and speak with those who have talked to me about cryptocurrency in the past. So, to the young Belizeans who will be getting into the digital currency space, I plead to the government to ensure that what we're doing doesn't stifle growth. It allows the opportunity to those who are interested and invested, not ensuring that our data is not breached as well, and the proper implementation, a clear guidance, the right trained personnel are all put in place. With that being said, Madam President, thank you.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 10.8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed.
Honorable members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it. I recognize Senator Glenfield Dennison.
Obliged, Madam President. I join my colleagues who have all said that we have to pass this one. Right? This one I'll pass. We're operating in a global space, and I never see any government act faster for pass legislation, both political parties, than when we have mutual legal evaluations and consequences that would come if we don't. Both parties. So I understand that this is a part of a larger picture that we need to look at. Because of the nature of the legislation, Madam President, is very technical, and the field that is being regulated is one that really I shouldn't even talk about, because I don't qualify. So I will talk about what I can talk about. These pieces of legislation are historically and have historically been and are the pieces of legislation that come before us pretty regularly. And a part of that is the need to ensure that the people who would need to access the status of our laws can access it. So I'm here to remind the Belizean people that the National Assembly keeps a very good record of all amendments to all pieces of legislation. They're cataloged by folders. So if you have the 2020 law, you can go in all the folders and you can look at it and you can find out what is the status of any piece of legislation in Belize, or you ask your AI to go and use that as the database that it needs to find if you have if you want to know what the current status of the law is. I was made to understand some years ago that the FIU had technical people in the form of a legislative drafter, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Pitts, Senator Pitts, on staff who was, okay. No, it's important because the consolidation of pieces of legislation like this is very important, so that we don't get a situation where people are a bit unsure about the status of the law. I know it's public information that a company named Dennison Consulting was in the news for non-compliance with FIU regulations which didn't apply to it. I chalked that one up to just a misunderstanding of the law. Yeah, that one was, people jumped for that one. But it highlighted an important point for me, in that as a society, one of the ways we will move forward, whether with digital assets or any aspect of our economic growth, is that we need to have a strong understanding of the legislative framework that will govern it. For example, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Koi, but like DigiWallet and anything that's fintech, that mobile money, that doesn't have anything to do with this, right, Senator Koi? That's governed by central bank, correct? And so the people who have DigiWallet can rest assured that the backstop there for their currency, if they have any problems, is the central bank. So the concerns that are valid from my friend Senator Faber for crypto, I just want to not leave the impression that what people in Belize might think are they're at risk for losing their money and like that, is already regulated by central bank for like DigiWallet. So there's a backstop there if Digicel does things and the money disappears. I think it's just a regime for companies like that keep poor people money, really $2 and so add up on scale, but that's another question altogether. So I wanted to make the point that I went to a conference last August, and that's the first time I started to hear words like blockchain and cryptocurrency, and I started to learn about all the nefarious activities that can be done and how fast you can move the money through and override the safeguards at the central banks. So I know very little about this industry. I said that to make the point I know very little about this industry. But a lot of the points made by Senator Faber sort of resonated with me as something we need to pay attention to as a country and really ensure that we're not only guided by mutual legal evaluations. You know, we sit down and we try to make sure we map out where we're going, because the technocrats at the different departments that are responsible enjoy a certain level of confidence from this honorable house that the things that they will propose are properly reasoned, properly researched, and are in the best interest of the country and Belizeans. So I want to make a call to them to push. I believe in the ability of our technical people, our workers, to move and advance this country. And I say to them, lead. This amendment, in my mind, especially the aspect of it that is from the financial services side, envision that maybe at the time they didn't have the resources that would have been needed when we passed the bill for them to deal with this sort of issues. So I want to know, and you could text me, whether you've gotten the resources that you need in those offices to do the work that you need to do, whether I call for a very target. I know they travel a lot. It's that crowd, they travel a lot. They always did a training. I jealous so tired. Yo, they barely did a Belize. Then they could travel for training. Then listen, no key work, they were fine one, and then they saw Miami, LA, then they about the travel. And my understanding of the traveling is that it's everything else irrelevant, Madam President, so I have to touch a button. The traveling is geared towards when they have evaluations mostly, right? So I want to encourage, we keep up that same sort of energy in relation to capacity building and training of the technical people that we need in not just for this, but for the financial sector as a whole. Because as a small country, we really need to ensure that we have the sort of people in the right places, notwithstanding the fact of my previous position on the need to reinstate Senator Koi at the Ministry of Finance. But we do need to have, like I joke, but it's important because we can't be penny wise and pound foolish there, you know, like that's one of the areas that I think we should be able to invest a lot in, and it doesn't add to the wage bill because it's not a public service body. So I commend the technocrats at the units responsible for identifying what needed to be done in relation to this and for bringing it forward. And I want to join my colleagues who have already also done so in commending your office, Madam President, and the National Assembly on a whole for the accompanying documents that came with the pieces of legislation. And I want to say to the people of Belize that they heard us. We've been asking for things like that for some time. Thank you, Madam President. I really... you see, this is the sort of progress that healthy debate brings to a developing country. Right? I joined my friend to ask for a parliamentary calendar. But we're moving in the right direction as a Senate, and I commend it because I'm not the type to only just say when things go wrong. I have a lot of things to talk about that are wrong later this afternoon. But, or maybe that tomorrow, I think that tomorrow. But this one is very good, Madam President, and the technical people in the particular ministries need to get the training that they need. They need the development that they need. This can't be a situation where people in ministries make decisions on who needs to go for what training and when, because they don't understand the importance of why the technocrats need to attend or develop their skills. Scholarships need to be made available for people in those particular areas who are who need to learn not only the enforcement but the investigative side of how to trace cryptocurrency and to identify the fraud. Maybe it's already been done. I would like to hear if it is. Whatever's being done, more needs to be done. Because it can't be that a CIB officer will be asked to see what he could do when a crime is uncovered. And he has no knowledge of how the realm in which the would-be criminals in crypto are operating, because this is not Little League. Like, there are teams of people who go to work just like the people from Fui Call Center every day, like that in regular job, for thief people e-money. That in job. Right. And I know people with high school diploma, people with degrees in IT, people with understanding Right. So those people make a living attacking systems and people, and I think we're vulnerable. And we ought to identify these vulnerabilities and help to minimize the possibility of the risk. Because once you're connected to an internet connection, and like I don't even understand how you protect it, Madam President. Like I don't pretend to understand, right? That's not something I know about. Like, you know, like you could tell me how I sit to plan our work. I can't. But what I do know is that I don't know enough, and that the little that I do know tells me, as a small country, we need a cadre of technical professionals in these ministries who are the elite of the elite. And we must pay them well so that we can retain them and have them help us to develop because I believe in people. That's all we have as a country, you know. And if we, like, we're just regulating, like for this one, we're just regulating the construct. I want to encourage, I want us to get to a place where we're encouraging our young Belizean programmers, our young Belizean entrepreneurs, as my friend has said, to get into these higher valued areas of expertise that can I'd try not say this, Madam President, that can add to our gross domestic product, so we're not so dependent upon the gas price. With that, I yield, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Christopher Cowie.
Thank you, Madam President. I got to say I was very impressed with the remarks by Senator for the opposition, lead Senator for the opposition, Senator Faber. Very comprehensive. I did sense a seeping in of some artificial intelligence, but the Deposit Insurance Corporation, it's a slight on us, it's a slight on Belize and our regulatory structure, but it's not in operational yet. So we look forward to when that comes in, but that is something that the banking sector definitely needs. In connection with the numerous comments made, I just step back a little bit on a high level. The regulatory gap that you spoke about, that is a major concern. Belize has gone through a lot and done a lot to address our exposure from an AML standpoint and beyond. Terrorism financing, proliferation financing, etc. We've come a long way, and now in the last round, the fourth round of the CFATF mutual evaluation, Belize is basically whitelisted, and absolutely we don't want to jeopardize that. I don't think, we have to commend Parliament on a whole, the House, the Senate, for participating actively and effectively in ensuring that kind of rating for our country. The Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Act and the Financial Services Commission Act are key cogs in that regulatory landscape. It exists, or there was a temporary prohibition under, I don't remember which one of the acts right now, under one of those acts that extended up to the end of December last year, that prohibited digital asset services being conducted from or within Belize. That expired, and as it was about to expire, it was important that we take steps to eliminate that regulatory gap. So the legislation was put forward to Cabinet and tabled, both the Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill and the Money Laundering Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill. Passed in the House, but unfortunately didn't get through to the Senate until today. To mitigate that regulatory gap, what the Financial Services Commission did was they passed a digital asset services licensing regulations. That was, I think, 162 of 2025, and took effect December 29 of 2025. So in a way, a stopgap measure was introduced that provide for the licensing of digital asset service providers. It's an SI. It's done by way of an SI. You don't, yeah. I don't believe that needs to, yeah, that needs an affirmative resolution. But